Hey, everybody, this is Coach Donald from Global Human Performance with our podcast, Training Well Done. And I am joined here with Coach Tim. Uh, get a little bit.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Excited to be here with Coach Donald, um, doing this thing as a tag team this time around.
So, we are rebooting Training Well Done. Some of you who are probably listening to this have listened to it before, so kudos to you. Decided to reboot because I've been wanting to do this podcast for a while, but I didn't really like doing the podcast by myself, and I always want to do a video podcast. But doing a video podcast while just staring at myself through a camera was just awkward, and it was better over audio. But then having guests was also the good part. And I was like, how do I add somebody to it? And so over the last year, we've been talking about this on and off. I was like, you know what? Coach Tim's going to join.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I remember when we first started talking about this, um, and I agree with you about the visual component. I mean, just sitting here in the studio and like looking at you in person, looking at the cameras and how all this is going to go down, I think it's really gonna level up this round two.
Yeah, we are at Studio Me. It's a podcast studio. So hopefully this goes really smooth. The objective was to be able to hit play and not to do any other work other than hit stop and upload things and write all the captions. So we're gonna see how that goes. Not nervous anymore. Maybe still nervous because I'm talking a lot. But the whole point of this is to talk. So who are we? For those of you who are new to this, my name is Coach Donald. I'm the owner of Global Human Performance. I've been doing performance coaching for athletes since 2012. I went to Slippery Rock University, went to University of Texas, and so everything about how I train, how I think through training, has been through the lens of strength and conditioning, track and field, and how they blend together, along with working through injury mitigation to be able to keep people healthy. So a lot of the people I've worked with are like 1 foot in physical therapy, 1 foot out. And there's just so much to learn as it relates to running and strength work that there's a lot of misnomers out there, and there's so many. And just through the experience of really focusing through that lens. And so a lot of training well done. And the whole tagline of the show is uh, the what, the why, and the how of quality training. So that's not going away. But we have some new thoughts in store that we're gonna be sharing.
Yeah, and I've been coaching primarily distance runners for the majority of my career, which is coming up on 2 decades now. Um, and I got into the game a little bit late. I do not have a formal background in strength and conditioning. I found it after my graduate studies. It was just something that I was really into. And that I could apply a lot of useful skill sets towards. And I just naturally gravitated towards focusing on distance athletes because that was something that I enjoyed doing. So something that I understood really, really well. So it's been, almost 20 years of living and learning a lot along the way.
Dude, that's a long time.
I know, I know.
Awesome. So, what are we going to talk about today? We want to talk about how to get stronger. Just a second ago, we were looking at like the whole podcast Rolodex of like the Training Well Done show, and we actually did a podcast together with Fleet Feet a few years back, right?
hmm
What was that
We
about? Do you
did,
remember?
we did. I can't recall.
It was
No.
like an interview though.
No, I think it was most likely me interviewing you about probably a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about
Mm.
today, honestly, to share with our audience at the time, sort of like a podcast version of the webinar that you've
Okay,
put
okay,
together.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we're gonna talk about this webinar a lot during this. Well, not a lot, but we'll reference it a lot during the show. This episode, how to get stronger. I just want to refresh this whole season 2 idea of what we're going through. We want this to be a lot more sciencey, but a lot more dialogue. So me and Coach Tim are going to talk back and forth about different things. We'll talk to each other and to you about these different aspects of performance coaching. So some of these first episodes, we want to talk about how to get stronger, how to improve your speed, how to improve your
Mhm.
endurance. These are the big three, right? For a lot of the people that we work with, we can talk about how to get bigger if that's something you want, but that's not what we do every day. A lot of people that we deal with every day, they want to get faster, they want to get stronger, and they want to be able to run longer, and they want to be able to run faster for longer. So those are a lot of the things that we will talk about and be able to really get into some of the weeds, but in a very accessible way. And so a lot of you listening may not have exercise science degrees and things like that. So I'm not going to sit here and get into gene expression a bunch, and I'm not going to act like I can talk about that ad nauseum, anyways. But also wanting to get into some of the things that are actually going on as you improve and train, so that you know why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's important that um, we break everything down in a way that the athlete understands, not just the what and the how, but the why as it relates to them individually too. And so that's where you get into more of the higher level stuff. Like, why is this person doing exercise A, B, and this person over here doing exercise X and Y, right?
Hmm.
Um, it comes down to so many factors. And I think that's where we can unpack things and make it a little bit higher level, but still very relatable for everyone who's
Yeah.
out there listening or watching, because we're on video now.
Yes, and we might be able to do the Spotify thing. You ever like watch a podcast on Spotify and like it has the video on some of the podcasts?
Oh yeah. I know what you're talking
So I'm hoping that
about.
we can do that. I have
Right.
not tried to figure that out yet. I know we can do this on YouTube, but that would be dope if we can like you
we're
can watch it on Spotify.
we're learning a lot along the way.
Yes. So let's start off with just coaching moments. What I want to start off with is just kind of highlighting just what's going on in our coaching world, individually, at the gym or otherwise, just so that we can just we coach, like this is what we do. So I want to always share something like that. But
Hmm.
as it relates right now, as far as strength and what I'm thinking of, and I thought about like writing this part out was at trackside. So having two very different athletes. One is a senior sprinter who's been training for a few years now, and one is a freshman girl
Okay.
and who's just starting. And so this whole aspect, I don't know, I'll probably use people's names, but like Shakur and Nia, and this whole like expression of like how the strength is playing out in their stride length and their
Hmm.
explosion out of the blocks, and seeing like the stride clearance out of there, like, oh, this is how the strength plays out. Especially with Nia, who's a lot younger, because like little teeny tiny steps, and oh, like there's learning how to punch into the ground. That is a big part of like being able to perform in sprints, is learning how to be violent to the ground.
Hmm.
But then there's the aspect of actually having the strength to be violent to the ground, especially when kids have great angles. Some kids don't. She does have great angles, and being able to push and seeing that grow as like the body learns how to be
That's
strong.
neat. That's neat.
So that's been like a really fun thing to see play out so far this fall as we get into like fall training through September.
When you have two very different athletes like that, coach, are you able in a context like that? Um, are you able to like um, pull the one athlete aside, have them watch the other, and give them visual reference of like, hey, look, it's not going to happen overnight, but like here's what you're going to look like in a few years, and if so, how does that resonate, especially with the younger crowd?
I think it resonates well. I usually have to do this over video because they don't know what they look like in comparison.
Uh,
And like I'll try to
yeah,
demo what I think they look
okay,
like,
yeah.
or I know what they look like, but I'll try to demo my best demonstration of it, but I don't know what I look like. So I record them and I'll show them, here's what you did here, and then I'll let them watch the other athlete live. But then I also have to record that because having a good eye for what somebody's doing takes time, and like 15-year-olds may not have
That
that.
makes sense, yeah.
But I always tell people, look at one leg and watch it cycle. That's easier said than done. So like we'll watch the video and there's like these little aha moments of like, oh, okay. And so they try to go emulate that.
Helps when you can slow it down too, I'm sure, right?
Yeah. And you can just kind of drag it. But like
Hmm.
Vipin, like he's great at that because he'll just watch Shakur run and then just like go do it right after. I'm like,
Oh, neat.
oh wow. Like it's very impressive actually.
Neat.
um
Good for
but
them.
But yeah, so being able to have that model really helps. As long as, making sure that I'm always still coaching the really advanced person, because sometimes it's like, all right, well, what about me? And it's like, all right,
Yeah.
so here's what we need to lock in on and do that. Sometimes that happens when there's like one really advanced person and then a bunch of newer people. That usually happens at school. Versus like when we're like in these smaller groups.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. When someone has already developed a high aptitude for something, it can oftentimes be easy to just say like, here's what to do. You know how to execute it, right? Go ahead. Um, I like the idea of starting these episodes with these coaching moments, because this is something that we talk about internally, right, in our team meetings. But I think it's really cool to highlight our members, and share some of the things that we see as coaches. So I just wanted to call out one of our relatively new athletes, Kendall, who just participated in the Great Race. She raced the 5K, and set a PR. So
Very
way to
nice,
go,
Kendall.
Kendall. And then came back and helped out by pacing a group for the 10K.
I remember when
Um,
Ananya put the card in there. I'm like, wait, is she doing both of those?
yeah,
Like she's racing and pacing,
yeah.
and Anya's like, yes. I'm like, oh, okay.
She had a great 5K race personally. Had an amazing experience pacing everyone else, and getting to hear everyone's stories and sharing their experience and their enthusiasm. But as it relates to getting stronger, the call out that I want to make here in particular is that, like, as a running coach, and I'm sure you would agree, but um, you know, after coaching so many athletes for so long, I can typically tell who I'm seeing before I can see any distinguishing features about them, right? Just by the way that they're moving, right? Everybody's stride is as unique as their fingerprint. Um, and I quite literally, if I have a clear day and a straight line of sight, can see people coming a mile away. During this 5K event, though, Kendall snuck up on me, and it was because of the fact that she was just carrying her body. She was moving very quickly, but carrying her body in a way that I was unfamiliar with, because I haven't really seen her run in so long. She's relatively new to the gym, um, and she was just moving so efficiently and so well that my eye didn't pick up her, like, the gait pattern that I was used to before she
Mm,
started strength training, right? So I know the old pattern. This was my first exposure to the new pattern, and it looked so good. She almost blew right by me. So it was cool to see out that she was running well. But running strong,
mm.
expressing that strength, those strength gains from the gym, and applying it to the sport of choice. It was really cool to see that in action.
That's awesome. Great job.
Yeah.
That makes me think. I have these random philosophical, or what I like to think is philosophical tangents. The whole idea of we have a image of people that we remember, and like holding their past against them when they like change and get better at
Uh
things. Like I'm definitely not talking about training right now. I'm really talking about people's character and behaviors.
huh.
And like especially with people very close to you, like your family and stuff like that, where like, oh, this person actually got better at these things, but it like takes a while to like
It
really
does.
all the way
It
accept
really
and
does.
acknowledge
Yeah.
that. And thinking you mentioned that, like I guess that also applies when it comes to training. Like, oh, you're getting better at that skill. Although I think it's usually more obvious when you get to see certain things. But even then, you can kind of miss. Like, there's some kids at the gym. I'm like, when did you get this strong?
Hmm.
And I see them every week. I'm like, but when did you get this strong?
Yeah.
It like catches you off guard a little
Yeah.
bit. Like, wait, I remember you were lifting this, and now you're lifting that.
That's a perfect way to say it. Just, it totally caught me off guard in a very positive way.
Mm. So, a couple things we want to talk about as we get closer to our deep dive are some common assumptions or really misassumptions about training. I have a couple that are top of mind to me right now that I want to talk about. First is getting bulky from lifting. I hear this a lot. You've heard this a lot. I bet Leslie hears this all the time. Of people like, oh, I want to like look like you. You gotta lift weights. Oh no, I don't want to lift like I don't want to lift weights. And this is common. My personal experience is common in a couple of dynamics. One, with a lot of women who might not have experience with those type of sports, power
Agreed.
sports, who want to start lifting weights. The whole idea of being toned, but always not trying to be the a hole who's like, well, toned means getting muscular, because like that doesn't click to most
Mm-hmm.
people. That doesn't always. That doesn't click to
That,
anybody who's not really deep in the strength world.
correct. Yeah.
So that's like
It's hard to
90% of
draw
the
that
population.
distinction unless you've, yeah.
And then, well, distance runners.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of, our business is even just being able to encourage runners to understand like you can lift weights and not get bulky. For those of you listening, there is a small percentage of people who have a genetic disposition to gain a lot of weights. To gain a lot of weights, goodness, to gain a lot of weight and muscle mass from lifting weights.
Mm.
Now, I do know
Mm-hmm.
one of these women, Coach Kyla, who you remember from a few years
I
ago.
do remember.
She's one of those people. She's like, she likes lifting weights, but she's also like, if I look at a weight, I'm just gonna
Yeah. Just
put on just mass. But like most people are
immediately.
not like that. There's a lot of 17-year-olds and 27-year-olds with high testosterone. These boys and young men who they can lift weights and they still don't put on muscle mass
Mm-hmm.
very much. Like it, if you're not trying to put on muscle mass, you probably are not going to put on muscle mass. Like you're probably not. There's a lot of training that has to go into that. Now, some people are more predispositioned to that, but if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not. You might be, but you're probably not. As a runner, you would have to be lifting a lot, very frequently,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll say very frequently, like 4, 5, 6 hours a week of very focused training to probably put on significant muscle mass. Even if you put on like a couple of pounds, it's probably really healthy to be able to have that on your body. But start getting into like 5, 10, 15 pounds of muscle mass is unlikely. It's more likely if you're like a 17-year-old boy, but less likely in pretty much every other scenario.
Yeah, I try and keep it very simple because to your point, Coach, we hear this all the time with the distance runners. We want to maintain an ideal racing weight, and if I start introducing strength training into my routine, that's going to throw everything out of whack, right? And I try and keep it very simple for them, in the sense that it's like, in order to get quote unquote bulky by lifting weights, that has to be your primary goal, right? Like it's a very intentional thing that you have to do. It's not just something that's going to happen accidentally. Um, and if you want to be intentional about it, you definitely could, no matter where you're starting from or what your disposition is. But it's not something that's just going to happen if that's not the designed outcome.
Yeah. I think that, there are some situations where if you run a really, really high volume, which for depending on your context might be 30 miles, might be 50 miles a week, you might put on a bit more if you're very, very lean with a very, very low body fat percentage. But even then, like some of that is you have to eat a lot more food to be able to put
Mm-hmm.
that muscle mass on. Your
Mm-hmm.
body's going to be dividing resources out.
Right.
And
Right.
so, and what we'll talk about in this podcast is that a lot of the strength gains that you get really are neuromuscular and just being able to toughen up some of the tissue there.
And even in that example you just gave, like what comes to my mind is just being clear in terms, right? Like someone who is lifting weights, eating enough, running maybe not a million miles a week will likely become more muscular, right?
Mm.
Which is fundamentally different than, let's say, quote unquote, bulking up in a way that
Mm.
would disproportionately affect their running.
Yes, yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. That, having useful muscle mass
Yeah.
that keeps you healthy.
Yep.
The other thing is this whole idea that like lifting weights is gonna like stunt your growth as a kid. When it comes to bone stress dynamics, kids jumping off of really high boxes and things like that adds significant stress to his body. You're putting multiples of your body weight through your bones, just jumping off of things. Even sprinting puts on a lot of stress to the body in a way that doing squats with a 30-pound weight will not do. I think that I grew up around that, like, oh, you're going to stunt your growth, especially being short
Mm.
and that happening. But lo and behold, like my dad's barely the average height for a man. I don't actually think he is, and my mom is like in the 4 foot range.
Okay.
So like I got stuck in the middle, which makes a lot of sense. But being able to lift weights as a young person, which we were talking like 10, 11, 12, this is largely about form still. Like they're very unlikely to get hurt, and you're more likely to get hurt probably playing your sport. Going out and playing soccer or playing football, you're much more likely to get hurt doing that. You can pull your hamstring, you might tear your ACL, you can literally get tackled,
Mm. Hmm.
or get kicked out even in soccer. Whereas lifting weights is you need to be supervised, but most of that issue is going to be being under strain with a weight that's too heavy, not knowing how to move. But if you are lifting weights with good form and practicing good form,
And know how to move in the first place.
yeah, you'll
Yeah.
be fine.
Yeah.
Should you be trying to 1 RM at 10? No.
Hmm.
But what's heavy to, I think, the whole conservative part of like being a parent, like they should be able to struggle through the weight, but at the very beginning, they need to learn how to move the weight to be able to handle the struggle.
Hmm. And what it feels like to move the
Mm.
weight too, right? Because that's fundamentally different than what they're experiencing and when they're practicing or competing at their sport. Um, I remember, just to share a real quick anecdote. I remember um, this wasn't too long ago. If I remember correctly, one of Coach Leslie's questions of the day in the gym was like, "What is your favorite piece of gym equipment?" Um, and I remembered you saying two things, and I can't remember what the second one was, but I remember the first one very clearly. And you said it was the hex bar. Um, and then later I asked you, to sort of unpack it because I had kind of had a feeling like why you had answered that because I knew it was your favorite implement, so it had to be there for a reason. And I thought, okay, maybe this kind of has to do something with the kids and our beginner athletes. Anyway, and then we got started talking about it, and Coach shared with me, it's like having training wheels. It's a really safe and effective tool to use to teach kids good mechanics, proper form, and sort of test their boundaries, their limits, and their thresholds in a way that's really really safe, and a lot more safe, like to your point, than perhaps competing.
Yeah, that hex bar, like I love that thing. I remember I first discovered it like when I was in college. I was like, oh, this is great. And when I first like had people learning how to do it, once you learn how to do the basic squat and you can do a goblet squat, oh, the hex bar is pretty intuitive. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
barbell squatting, you got to do all this and that. It's much more free of a free weight that you need a little bit more coaching on, and you can load a trap bar really well,
Yeah,
really safely, versus
yeah.
or even like a deadlift, which I love deadlifts and I think they're a great exercise, but it does take more like neuromuscular awareness. So you have to have more body awareness to do a good deadlift if you're not like blessed that way to just get that. It takes a lot more coaching, so it takes a little bit more time. But the hex bar, once you learn how to keep your back straight, you just go up and down.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's a great tool, especially for this particular audience that we're addressing here. Um, so strength training, great for youth athletes.
There
What
we
we're
go.
landing on, right?
Yes, yes, indeed. And you see videos online of kids doing all sorts of. There's this cool kid, this girl who like she's like 6, and like her dad takes her downhill skiing. She's really good
Okay.
at skiing, like in a way that I don't know if I'll ever reach her 6-year-old level of proficiency at. But like you can do hard things under supervision, and this strength training is not nearly as hard as skiing.
Mm.
So what we want to do for this episode, we're gonna get into a deep dive, and we're gonna talk through a series of questions that you might have had to understand that. And so we'll talk through some of these things. So the first thing is, well, what actually happens when you're getting stronger? There's a couple of main things that I want to highlight that happen as we get stronger. One, we want to talk about the neuromuscular system. So when you get stronger, you gain a lot of strength early on in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And the more untrained you are, the more strength you're going to get. And quite frankly, it almost doesn't matter how great specific the programming is. You're going to get stronger even just looking at the weights too long if you're very untrained at them. We find this with people who are new, especially like when you're younger. This is even higher. Part of what goes on is your body learns how to be coordinated. One of the reasons that strength training is great for even young developing athletes is just coordinating their body
Mm-hmm.
awareness. And so part of that strength gain is just your body being able to recruit muscle fibers better. What does it mean to recruit muscle fibers? I say that word all the time, but I think that might be jargon. I think recruit's jargon. So you have your nerves. We all know that. We have an electric system in our body. The nerves split down in all these little smaller and smaller nerves. And you have a nerve that innervates or shocks, for lack of a better
Hmm.
word, shocks a bunch of muscle fibers. Now, in your quadriceps, like your big thigh muscles, one nerve, I think I read on that on one of these papers that that nerve can shock like 1,000 muscle fibers. Whereas in your eyes,
Hmm.
one nerve shocks just like a handful of muscle
Hmm.
fibers. So there's a lot finer movement, and you can think about like in your
Hmm.
fingers, one nerve, innervates very few muscle fibers relative to like your glutes and quads, which are just much more massive movers. And so as you train more, your body's able to actually recruit more of them when you do something. Part of strength literally means that you can get more of them to move every time you shock them and have a more coordination, or I should say, more shocks at the right time.
Mm. Okay.
And so if we think about doing a squat, somebody who's new, think about some of the new people that have come. When you watch them do a squat and they're kind of like shaky through the beginning, their muscles are fatiguing out because it's trying to figure out what's the actual coordination to be able to do this. And then the next time they come in, they're much better at it. Or even like later on in that session, actually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Oftentimes when we see that, it's less, you know, you might look at that happening and say, um, "Hmm, oh, this person isn't necessarily strong enough to lift this load or this weight or whatever it is because of that uncoordination." Um, when really that's not the case. The strength is there. They're just figuring out how to access it or how
Hmm.
to express it, and that's why you do see a lot of times over the course of one session to the next, or to your point, just by doing the reps during that one session, you see massive improvement with these beginner athletes.
Yeah. I actually want to, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do this, but I am going to be able to do this. So Coach Adam is helping with some of the research stuff. Like this is stuff that I studied in school, but like he's gonna like provide me with some cool like research articles to read. So he sent me a meta-analysis, and I'll probably tag it in the comments because it's not in the in the caption. Yeah, the caption. One of the things that was cool to read that was a good reminder for me was that for people who are new to strength training, just doing general strength work, and oh my gosh, one of these kids, I'm not gonna say his name, but he's always like, he's sending me stuff on Instagram all the time of like, do this, do
Oh, we
that,
should do this.
and it's
Yeah,
like, bro, hold on.
yeah. Pump your brakes.
Being able to do basic general strength work, being a squat, hinge, push, pull, and all
Hmm.
that, has a better adaptation for teaching young people, not even young people, new people, how to lift weights well and build their strength better than these like super sport specific power exercises. If you are new to training, you will get stronger learning how to squat than like doing, let's say, a box squat at like a quarter squat off
Hmm.
a box, which has a very specific training adaptation for really advanced athletes versus like just squat to full length and come back up. You'll build a lot more strength that way. And so it's a nice refresher in that part because you're going to be able to really teach the body a lot more through there, and it needs like a lower intensity level of stimulation to gain a lot of that. Versus if you start doing more advanced stuff too early, you're not going to get all the gains you could get.
Uh
You
huh.
risk injury,
Uh huh.
and then on top of that, you don't want to blunt your response to advanced training later.
Correct. You're really doing yourself a disservice by moving too fast, too quickly with this kind of stuff. And if you are, a youth athlete or an adult athlete who's just beginning, at a certain point, like we want you to stick with it and adhere to the program and continue to progress. But at a certain point, you probably will be bored of just doing those main movements over and over until you've really perfected them. But that's the base of the pyramid, right? That's how you're going to set yourself up for future success.
Yeah, so a big part of that is big part of strength is your body learning how to move better. And this happens for a while. This can go on, I mean, in your first couple of years of training,
Mm-hmm.
where a big part of that adaptation is just better neuro drive and being able to fire better, being able to coordinate better. But the other part is literally your muscles growing. And so being able to actually get bigger muscle fibers is going to give you more cross-sectional areas. So like this is a video. So your muscle, let's say it's this
Mm-hmm.
smaller of a circle here. As you lift weights, the circle gets bigger. And so you have what's called actin and myosin inside your muscle fibers. And the leading understanding of how muscles contract is that the actin, there's like a blocker on them and it moves out the way, and then the myosin connects and then it pulls them. Well, as you get bigger, as you lift weights, you get bigger to even this much smaller extents, and you have more of these cross bridges, they call them. So imagine visually, if you close your eyes, I'm gonna make up an analogy. Hopefully this works. You have your big bridge over a big old river, right? And the ends of the bridge in this context actually pull the land masses together. So think about the ends of the bridges clawing into the ground and pulling the ground closer to each other. As you gain more strength, you have more of these bridges that can pull the landmass together. So as you have more bridges, think about going from a place like Austin, Texas, which only has a few bridges across what's that, the Colorado River? I don't know what river that is that goes to Austin. Called Lady Bird Lake, but I think it's the Colorado
Oh,
River.
my geography
My geography
is
is usually good, but I don't know
not
this
where
answer.
it should be.
So the like Austin doesn't have that many bridges, and I mean it has bridges, but not that many. Whereas Pittsburgh has a bunch of bridges, and so you could consider Pittsburgh has more cross sectional area to pull land masses
Mm,
together. So as you get stronger, your muscles actually get bigger to have more of these bridges, and so that means they can pull more force together. So that is a big part of gaining strength. Really, really big, strong people have a lot of these. Now, there's some nuance. There's some people who are really big who are not very strong, but we're not getting there right now. So, as you gain some muscle mass, you will also be able to pull more weight. And that is also part of getting stronger is building up some muscle mass. So, when you see runners with really defined quads, you have strong arms that actually have a lot of capacity to run all those steps because you got to keep swinging your arms and your shoulders. And
hmm
those can get tired. And if those get tired, those also will slow you down.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't speak for everyone who's watching or listening, but the bridge visual worked.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I liked it.
So those are two of the big things that go on when you're getting stronger. Your nervous system is much more efficient at being strong and moving things well. And then the other part is actually having more cross bridges to do that.
hmm So then, what does that look like in terms of like an athlete's training week or their training season? And I know this is going to differ from a first time beginner, a youth athlete versus an adult athlete. Um, but for someone who is implementing a strength training routine to become better at a sport specific activity, like what does that look like in actual practice for them?
Are you asking, like, okay, so what they should be doing, like what that looks like throughout the week?
Correct. Yeah. So like we talked earlier before about like if someone was trying to quote unquote get bulky, right? They're lifting 6 to 7 times a week. If someone is just trying to develop this overall um, sort of a generalized strength, like the base of the pyramid, like we were talking about, to become more injury resilient, to get through their soccer season in one piece.
Okay. So 6 or 7 times a week, now we're in CT Fletcher territory. I command you to grow. If you don't know this reference, I showed Delia this one of her first days in the gym. I love it. I think I showed it again to her 2 years later. I command you to grow. You need to like just type that into your YouTube search bar. Type in "I command you to grow CT Fletcher." We're getting into his territory where he said he did curls on his birthday, on his anniversary, on Christmas, every day for like I forget how long he said, how many months he said to get 22-inch arms. He did curls every day.
Okay.
You, listener, do not need to lift and do curls 7 days a week. Although I actually do like doing like push-ups and stuff like that 7 days a week, or like at least six. But that's minor. Anyways, so if you're trying to get bulky, you're gonna need to lift at least 3 days a week, at least if your primary goal is to be putting on muscle
Sure.
mass. Um, and not running too much, right? But most people who have those goals, they're like, Lauren, I'll run like twice a week. I met people at run clubs like, yeah, like I'm just
It's
trying to put on
cardio
muscle
day.
mass
Yeah.
and run clubs cardio day.
Yep.
And so that works out well. Outside of that, though, for a lot of like athletes who are just training, some of it's seasonal. So when you're in the in season, you have really high demands from practice, from competitions. So being able to lift twice a week is a really good setup, even sometimes once a week, if your demands are just too high in life.
Okay.
You don't want to train so much that it's stressful to just get through the week. But that varies from person to person based on what family stuff. If you're grown, how much family stuff do you have going on?
Sure.
Other professional commitments. If you're a kid, you have time to do your homework,
Yeah.
right? So, but being able to train through that season is going to really allow with better coordination, movement quality. But twice a week is enough because the hormonal effects that go on, they have decently long half lives of a few days. And then I'm not definitely going to, I want to get into that in another episode. So if you want to get into talking about hormones and gene expression, please give me a good reason to do so. Because that's something I would need to read up on to be able to talk at podcast length about. But I would love to do that. Anyways,
Yeah.
um,
We welcome feedback and suggestions for topics, but I'm with you, coach. If we go down that road, I'm here for it.
yes, that'll be fun. And also there's recovery. So you need a few days to be able to recover from some of these things. So, in season, once, twice a week is usually good. Out of On the off season, again, it still depends on demands, but that's where you're able to train 2, 3 times a week and you could train 4 times a week. That gets into the territory of, you really working on athleticism for those 3 or 4 days a week to where
Mm-hmm.
we're blending in a lot more of the plyometric speed training work and being able to train a lot of different profiles throughout the week. I mean, you're doing your basic training, but you can get a little bit more volume in to really boost those gains. But that also depends on if you're doing some sort of extra skill practice throughout the week to really build your skills, or if you're in off season for one sport, are you in off season for sports overall, or are you playing another
Mm-hmm.
sport at the time?
Yeah. And you brought up an interesting word there, and that's something else that we won't have time for in this episode to unpack, but like the skill work and
Mhm.
like what does that mean? What does that look like? And when, where, and how do you do the skill work?
Yeah, that is a hill. I'm not saying I'm definitely willing to die on, but I'm getting closer to this in that youth athletes today, especially basketball players, especially basketball and soccer players, but especially basketball players, and why we don't market the basketball players. Y'all spend so much time just competing,
Mm,
and there's so much time spent on competition and not enough time for a lot of athletes spent on the raw skills. Not enough
mm-hmm.
time spent practicing foul shots, practicing shooting, and really being able to master some of these skills, and then being able to do smaller things that blend these into bigger skills that you can then take in the competition. Because you can do so much shooting, so much, dribble here, make a layup, dribble here and shoot, learning these different moves that you can have, and even doing some small level competitive drills that don't have such a high recovery cost. It's not even the issue of competing, because it's good to compete a lot in a certain sense of understanding game fluidity and slowing the game
Of
down,
course, yeah.
but there's a high cost to competing a lot on your body.
Uh-huh.
And I find that athletes who are competing all the time, they struggle not being hurt, especially if they're competing in the same sport the whole time
Mm-hmm.
versus being able to grow that movement library with another sport, or just taking an off season to do lower intensity skill development that then they can translate into some of the high intensity work later.
Right, right. Like that early specialization, and this is another a rabbit hole we could go down. That early specialization with one sport is actually to the athlete's detriment. And um, yes, I mean to a degree, to get better at doing a thing, you need to do more of the thing. Um, but more isn't always better. Better is better.
Mm.
So if you're doing more of the thing, but it's at a subpar level, are you really doing yourself a favor? Or do you really need to spend time just getting the nuts and bolts in place,
Yeah.
right? With this skill work.
So I want to answer one more of our deep dive questions before we kind of get to the back end of this. And that is, how can strength training be used as injury prevention? A lot of people especially in the running community, they get into
Absolutely.
strength
Yeah.
training because their physical therapist told them, because hey, you got this patellar tendonitis going on. If you don't want to see me some more, you should go lift weights. Um, shout out to like we have like a half dozen physical therapy partners,
Yeah.
and just
Y'all
thank
are
y'all for
great.
the referrals and for helping our people out. When things go wrong, because things just don't go great in sports, and for your advocacy for strength training work, to be able to keep people healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how does this work? You have these things called tendons. If you have been hurt before, you know what tendons are because your PT told you, or your ortho told you, because you have patellar tendonitis, or as Sean liked to remind me of, tendinopathy. Itis, so that was that a suffix, means that you have an irritation, it's
Uh-huh.
inflammation. So you have an immune system response going on right there. And if you have it chronically, that can lead to an opathy where the actual tissue is getting smaller. He told me I had that in my knee at one point when I was not doing such a great job training.
Itis or apathy?
Opathy.
Ooh.
And so, I mean, I don't know if that was like diagnosed. That was just that was a PT's understanding of the situation. It was not, I did not get like MRI for
Mm-hmm.
that. But when apathy means that it's starting to shrink and you have a more serious issue. And so when you run a lot, let's use running as an example. When you run a lot of miles, I have my dump truck theory of training. I think I talked about this maybe in the first few episodes of this show. Everybody's body has a stress limit on how much it can take. If you drive a Toyota Prius, your car can only take so much stress
Mm-hmm.
before something breaks. If you drive a pickup truck, your body can handle more stress than before it breaks. There's differing between cars because if you drive, as far as I'm concerned, if you drive like a Chrysler or like what I see with people with BMWs, your car might break much more frequently.
Mm.
Now I don't want to get into the whole thing about BMW because I don't know enough about cars, but there's also this level
I
of
know nothing about cars.
high performance vehicles and high performance athletes have higher maintenance costs. So the faster you are, the more explosive you are, the more likely you can break, versus like the other way around. But nonetheless, um, I don't know. Dodges, oh my gosh, I feel like people who drive Chargers, like their cars are always in the shop. Versus, if you have like a good Toyota or like a good Volkswagen, they don't break as much. But that's for another day. So, anyways, Prius has less of a stress tolerance than a pickup truck, but a dump truck, you can just pile dirt and work on it, and it takes a lot before it can break.
Sure.
Strength training helps with improving that stress tolerance because it connects to your ligaments, your tendons. You have muscle to tendon to bone, and your muscles pull on tendons that make the bones move. That's how this works. And so the tendons themselves have their own stress limits, and they are grown by strength training. So your tendons can get thicker and more resilient, and they do that by way of strength training. If you train in a volume and intensity that's below their stress tolerance, then and you also recover enough in between sessions, you won't have an issue. But sometimes you find that if you're trying to reach the next ceiling, the next level, sorry, you're trying to break through a ceiling and make the next level of
Mm-hmm.
performance, you need to do harder training or more training. But your tendons need to have the stress tolerance to handle that. You find sometimes people, they either start adding more training, they maybe run more miles, they add some extra practices, or they join a more high level team
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing harder workouts and their body starts to break because they can't handle that. There's multiple reasons why they can't, but one of those reasons is that their joints are not strong enough to handle that much volume, that much intensity, with that little recovery, before something breaks and goes wrong. And so being able to strength train makes your ligaments thicker. It allows the actual collagen fibers to be better aligned for that type of work so that it can handle the stress a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could give you 24 examples off the top of my head from the past, you know, several years even, um, of incidents with athletes who are, um, I don't want to say overtraining because that's not technically correct, but they're introducing um, a novel and more strenuous stimulus into their training, thinking that that's going to take them to the next level, and the body just isn't ready for it. So, like from in terms of injury prevention, um, especially in the distance running community, it's more of a train to train situation, right? Like, get your body in a place where eventually it can handle that additional load, right? Um, but you have to have the infrastructure to be able to absorb that training when it comes anyway. And so, I've worked with athletes who, you know, prior to starting strength training, um, 50 miles a week, they're fine. 51 miles a week, they're broken. And like the distinction was that clear. And it's not always that clear cut and not always that black and white. But the idea here is that, in this particular example, in order for this athlete to really level up on their racing, we needed to introduce higher volume weeks, but we couldn't introduce higher volume weeks until we started strength training because we could never get over 50 miles before they got hurt,
Mm.
right? So that's just like one real world example where you use strength training as an injury prevention, um, not only to prevent maybe previous injuries from recurring again, but also to put yourself equip yourself for success when you do level up your run specific training and conditioning, that your body's already able to handle that. Um, and it again almost comes back to some of those misunderstandings that we were addressing in the beginning of the show too. Like, for endurance athletes, we need to make sure that we're treating strength training um, as not just a hey, my muscles are getting stronger sort of situation, right? Because
Mm.
it's not. That's only one piece of a very large puzzle.
Now, in 2025, there's a lot of information about this. You can see it on Instagram, on YouTube, there's a thousand other, well, maybe not a thousand, but there's plenty of other podcasts kind of talking about some of the same things. What do you feel like is still some of the main res- re- friction that gets in the way of runners getting into and embracing strength training?
Um, I'm so glad you asked that question. And I promise I will try not to eat up the remaining time on our podcast here. But um, there are two things that I see predominantly. Um, Distance runners are exceedingly stubborn by nature, and that's something that makes us good at what we do, right? That's just the fact of the matter. With that being the case, most of the time strength training doesn't even enter into the picture until something has already happened, and then it's reactive versus proactive, right? And Coach Leslie loves to say this all the time, right? Like, it's just a matter of time, right, before something goes wrong, and when it does, we hope it's nothing serious, of course. um, but until someone gets hurt, they think they're invincible. And then once they realize, oh, I'm not invincible and I do have something or some things that I need to address, and the best and most efficient way to address it is strength training, okay, then they start to do that. So that's one. The other thing that comes into the picture is just a time commitment. Um, and you see this with, gen pop athletes, as well as, your high performers who may allocate even more of their total training time during the course of a week to run specific conditioning. But, um, you know, most of us, have careers, we have jobs, we have life priorities, we have things that we have to balance. And so your training time during any week is limited. And, um, you know, what percentage do we allocate to running and doing the sport specific activity versus strength training? How does that work out? So the second thing, I guess what I'm saying is the second um, sticking point or friction point with endurance runners embracing a strength training protocol is that for every minute you spend in the gym, that's one less minute that you're spending running.
Mm.
And most of the time, we would all rather be running.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. But you can gain. You know what? One of my stray thoughts, I want to shout out Joe because my man Joe, he dropped what was it, 7 minutes off
Yeah,
that
seven
run
minutes.
around the square time. And I think Joe, I know I've seen Joe at Shenley running, like just on his own, but I know that I think he only really runs like 2, 3 times a week.
Hmm.
Now he's not like, super, super fast, but he went from like, oh, that's cool to like, oh my.
Yeah,
Like that's where he runs like
yeah,
2, 3 times a week. He lifts weights twice. And I'm like, Leslie told me his great race time, and I was like, "What? Like, how do you run 45 minutes in the 10K? That was crazy."
yeah.
But yeah, I get that. I hear that all the time about 1 less minute running. Well, I don't want to spend 1 less minute running.
Right.
Um,
And I would argue just as and I have this conversation with the adult population all the time, especially when they're in a longer training cycle. Is like, it's 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 sort of the same thing as when we're talking about the youth athletes when they're in season versus out of season too, right? Like, just because you're in the gym strength training twice a week for the start of your training cycle doesn't mean you have to do that for your entire training cycle
mhm,
either. You can do that for 12 of your 16 or 20 weeks and then maybe substitute a strength training session for a run to help bolster your weekly volume as you're hitting your peak weeks. There's no problem there because you've already done the work, like you've done the work ahead of time, so now you can safely handle that volume like we
yeah,
just mentioned. So, like, just because you start a training cycle under one set of parameters doesn't necessarily mean that's a fixed set of parameters for the duration.
yeah. I think something we should consider sending people home early when it's like, all right, you did 40 minutes. You did what we needed you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Peace. Actually, I heard it was a few people I've actually said, "Oh, you didn't do the rest of your running this week. All right, we're like 35 minutes into the lift. All right, that's it. Go run now." I famously remember doing that to Will quite a few times, where it's like, "All right, you need to go run now so you can get your miles." This is earlier in Will's running career when he wasn't like, yeah, I think it was maybe a sophomore year where he was over the years he's run more and more every year,
Mm-hmm.
which like most distance runners, you run more as you get older.
I encouraged Lindsay to sit out trackside this week.
Hmm.
We moved it to the gym because of weather, so the workout was going to be fundamentally different than the
Hmm.
repeats we had planned. So there was extenuating circumstances, but um, I told her, I was like, you can't drive to the gym and do this in gym workout at the expense of getting mileage in because typically she'd run to the track and back.
Hmm.
Um, so actively said, no, right now for where you are in your training cycle, those miles are more important.
Yeah.
That's not always the answer though.
Yeah. So I want to finish this out talking about some things that you, listener, can do on your own for strength training and also some things not to do. So I want to start with a few things not to do. I'm going to keep this quick. One, not following a progressive overload. I think this will be another good topic is talking about progressive overload versus undulating training, or not, no, sorry, a linear periodization versus an undulating periodization.
Uh-huh.
But also, what does progressive overload mean in the first place? That means that you're adding more stress as you go along. You cannot lift the same weight for 6 months. If you are lifting the same weight for 6 months, you are very much doing something wrong if that's the only weight you can lift. But, a lot of people, you see this with cross country athletes, especially like if their coach is not like super into weightlifting. I saw this in college sometimes. We see this with a lot of sport teams, even or even just parents at home. I have to like sometimes calm some kids' moms down, like, oh no, your daughter or your son will be fine. Um, if you lift a little bit of weight all the time, you will not really get stronger. And so you need to progressively be stressing the body more and more by either lifting more weights or lifting more reps, or doing more tempo through that. But you need to be lifting more weights over time. The other thing, not using isometric tempos. Use some isometric tempos. What is an isometric? That means you're holding a position. So maybe you sit down in your squat for
Mm-hmm.
30 seconds. Maybe you sit in there for 10 seconds. You can do some exercise where you're sitting there for 30 seconds. When I mentioned about the injury prevention work, the isometric hold, your tendons love that stuff. They really respond well to time under tension. So being able to hold a position for a while really is good for improving that joint strength. And you can not colloquially, but like you can just generally think of like training your tendons like training your joint. It's not exactly the same thing, but more or less you can think about it that way. So if you're working on your quad tendon, you are going to be thinking about just training your knees to be stronger. And for most people,
Mm-hmm.
training your knees to be stronger is a great thing. So doing pause squats is awesome, or pause lunges. When it comes back to the whole youth athlete part, you got to supervise the kids. So if you are a parent, like, don't just send your kid to the gym. I see this happen. Don't send your kid to the gym if they don't know how to lift, especially if they're not like going to the trainer. Like, kids will go to LA Fitness or go to the
Mm-hmm.
JCC, and
Yeah.
they're like, "Yeah, I'm just lifting." And it's like, "Did anybody teach you how to lift?" They're like, "No." Like, I mean, these aren't kids from our gym, but these are kids that I've meet. Just, I meet kids teammates, and they're like, "Yeah, just go to the
Yeah.
gym and like lift." What do you do? Oh, I do curls and I
Yeah.
text, and
Yeah.
like I do some 10-pound squats, and I'm like, okay,
Best case scenario is it's not the best use of your time.
yeah.
Worst case scenario, there's injury liability there.
I did a. So there was a school I was doing some gym class subbing there a few years ago,
Okay.
and there was these boys in the gym. They were just there was no teacher with them. There was like 10 of them in the gym, and these dudes were they were deadlifting, and they weren't like big dudes either. And they were like deadlifting like 250 pounds with the roundest of back. They looked like the St. Louis Arch
Mm-hmm.
in their deadlifting, and it was like, oh, I had to stop them. Like, y'all need to chill out. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, they weren't
You
part of
need
my
to-
group. I was
you-
like training like 3 kids or 5. I don't know. It was like 5 kids for this like gym class substitution. These boys over there. I'm like, bro, y'all need to chill. Like, y'all can't pull y'all shouldn't pull y'all backs up, but y'all definitely not gonna do this while I'm in here.
Uh-huh.
I'm not responsible for y'all, but it's gonna look like it. Please stop. Supervise. And then the other thing is not focusing on major movers. Don't do curls in squat rack. That's just like a fun pet peeve. I do curls in the squat rack. It's actually very pleasant to do. But don't go to the gym and just like, oh, I'm gonna do some knee extensions. I'm gonna do like some adductor work. You should do some adductor work. But like, that's all you did, and you just did some curls and squat and like in some calves. You need to do your main movements. So you need to squat. You
Mhm.
need to hinge. You need to do both of those on one leg. So you need to do your SLDLs and lunges. You need to push with your upper body. You need to pull with your upper body. Use your core to be able to brace. Use your core to be able to rotate. If you're able to hit those things, you're gonna hit a lot.
Yeah, there's a reason why accessory work is called accessory work,
Mhm.
right? That's if we have time.
Yeah.
And I know, and we hear this from our athletes sometimes that, even though we update the programming every, 6-8 weeks, and introduce some new stuff based on where people are at in their cycle and for individual athletes and things like that, like, a lot of times it is repetitive because those main movers and those main movement patterns are so fundamentally important.
Yeah. So be able to, keep those lessons in mind. Now, if you're looking for some resources, first of all, there's AI. And I know there's some AI haters out there. I like AI. You can learn a lot on AI about good strength training. And if you ask it the right questions, it'll help guide you along. Now, there's also really great YouTube channels you can follow if you're looking for coaches with, strength conditioning certifications. They have videos on beginners lifting, especially if it's touted for beginners and it looks clean. These are good things to do. So you can find those resources. There's plenty of great coaches online who have resources to share about beginning strength training or strength training for runners. We also have a webinar that we recorded on strength training for runners. And so in the link below, I guess in the caption, you can click on that and you can get our webinar. The webinar is also how we're helping sponsor this podcast. So we do not have like the better helps in the what are these other things on there? The VPNs and all these things that your favorite YouTube creators have as sponsors on there. I have
None of
YouTube
that.
Premium, and so like I hate when I watch somebody else's YouTube and they have like regular ads on there. It drives me crazy. You have to skip through. Gosh, no. I tell Leslie it's called peasant YouTube. It's like it's the best $10 I have a month I ever spend. But like, the content creators, they still have the sponsors inside the show, and I have a good nose for it. Oh, I can tell I'm skipping 30 seconds.
Oh yeah.
But anyways, we don't have any of those people. I'm not saying we never will, but I don't have any ambition of doing that. We have a webinar, and so if you buy the webinar, it's $10. That helps sponsor the cost of the show, so we can use this awesome studio. And you'll be able to. What's in the webinar? You're pitching us a webinar. What's in the webinar? The webinar is our full strength training. Like, here's how you begin strength training. So I show you a bunch of exercises that you can do. Push, pull, single leg, squat hinge, be able to use your core, brace and rotate. Like all of these have different exercise examples in them and how to do them. You can drag it along, you can pause it, and you can do it and then look at, oh, I'm doing it right. Okay. And watch
Hmm.
through there. I love whiteboarding. I whiteboard my personal life. I have a cousin. He's like my uncle cousin. Like he was an uncle until I graduated from college and he started calling me his cousin because he's like 40 or 30 years older than me.
Okay.
And you know how that like kind of I don't know how it was for you growing up, but like when you're like 15 or like even like 10, somebody's an adult, they'll always like have a formal title. That's how I grew up. So I don't like when these kids just be like, "Hey Donald, bro, it's
Yeah.
Coach Donald." Like,
Yeah.
I don't send you but I tell them I don't send you raunchy things on Instagram, so we're not friends. So like don't talk to me like that.
That's the dividing line
That's the
right there.
dividing line. Um so at any rate, I whiteboard out how to do the programming. How do you put together sets and reps? How do you apply metrics? What does it look like to train twice a week, which is what the webinar is basically set up on, is a
Hmm.
twice a week training. So I talk through different rep ranges, what they mean, things that we'll talk about on this podcast. It's all in this webinar. It's 1 hour, and you have instant access to it. So click that below. Check that out if you want to be able to have more access to things. But there's some great resources out there. I think this is a great way to get started. Uh, Thank y'all. Please give us feedback. So I think some Spotify you can like leave comments. I know on YouTube you can leave comments. You can also email us or message us on Instagram. So you can send a message. I want to talk about what you want to hear. We're gonna generally talk about strength, speed, and endurance a
Yep.
lot of the times, but there's so many subtopics around there. Different miscommunications, different like cool sciencey things about that, and ways that you can enhance your training that we want to share about. So please give us feedback.
Gene expression.
Gene expression, yes.
No, yeah, I just want to say to go back to your webinar real fast. It really is like a master class in strength training. It's a resource that Coach Donald put together a while ago. That's been widely circulated, and in a past life, I used it extensively as a resource. So it is very very much worthwhile. Um, and then the last thing I want to say is thanks for getting us this space. This
Yeah,
is really cool.
this is great. It was fun recording in here. And I want to shout out Coach Eden for like being there for all those hours helping me record that thing on webinar because it was a lot. But yes, this is a beautiful space. So I look forward to our next
Yeah,
episode.
it's a lot more comfortable than just talking into our phones in the car.
Yeah, that's what I did for a lot of the. If you scroll down on the Training Well Done podcast, a lot of the episodes in 2023, I was like, I'm gonna record these in my car while ideas were fresh, but the audio's questionable.
I remember having to get to the South Hills to my office in Fleet Feet early enough in the morning that there weren't any traffic noises outside, so that way I could sit in the office and like do it on my phone to
Oh, you did that too?
cut down on the ambient noise. Yeah. This is so much nicer, so much cleaner, and for better or worse, people can see us now. So we'll
Yeah.
have to take their vote on that.
All right. Let us know how your training goes. Have a good week.